a bit exciting. So even if you do know charity entrepreneurship quite well, there will be some quite new stuff in this talk because we are announcing some pretty large changes. So you're the first to hear about it, and then it will kind of be a little bit more learned about as the various EA conferences roll out. So charity entrepreneurship is aiming to change. And the point of this talk is kind of encouraging and inspiring people to be a bit more ambitious with our careers. As you've heard from other speakers already, I do think that career paths are one of the biggest ways to leverage a difference, although there's lots of other ways, but this is the one that I'm going to focus on here because it's the one that we're most in the position to help with. So a tiny bit about charity entrepreneurship, which some of you may already know. We're basically an incubator trying to start really fantastic charitable organizations. So we have incubated about 30 projects now. They've kind of spanned the gamut. A lot of them are in global health, a lot of them are in animals, a lot of them are mental health. So cause area is fairly diverse. There's some bio-risk ones as well. But we always have the same mission of trying to start charities that are what we describe as field leading, best of the best. The history of this is there were some great charities that were discovered. Against Malaria Foundation, Give Directly, top Give recommended charities. Same thing for other cause areas, top animal charities and this sort of thing. But a lot of these charities were discovered by just looking through thousands and thousands of charities and kind of finding the things that were the very best, the things that were anomalously good, partly because of luck, partly because of talented founders, this sort of thing. Later, there were some people that were thinking, okay, can this be replicated but more systematically? What if someone takes these principles of cost effectiveness, evidence-based, trying to have the most impact, but you bake it into the charity from day one? So the first charity that I know of that was really doing this is New Incentives, which is now Give recommended. But soon after charity was one of mine, Charity Science Health. So that was vaccine reminders in India, and we kind of started from scratch and did the research and tried to find something that we thought could be competitive with the very best in terms of cost effectiveness, evidence base, and wasn't going to get done otherwise. So there was actually a neglected gap, which is a bit different than what GiveWell typically finds because they're looking for already great executors. We were looking for the gaps. So Charity Science Health went pretty well. We got GiveWell incubated, which is kind of the pre-phase to getting a GiveWell top recommendation eventually, many years after you're big enough to handle that. But a side thing that came out of this was there were a few other ideas that we found that just looked fantastically promising. But not really people in the position to found them. We certainly weren't. We were already running 150% founding Charity Science Health. And although we put the ideas out to the EA community, the general philanthropic community, and there was lots of interest, people were like, I'd fund this, or can you hire me to work on this? There was no one willing to quite pick up the ball and run the whole way with it because it's a pretty big challenge to start a charity from scratch. We ended up kind of supporting one of these people a couple years later, Brandon, who actually also has a medical background, to found Fortify Health, co-founded with Nikita, and that was even more impactful than my damn charity, I would say. So went really well as well, and took a very small push out the door comparatively. We gave them, I think, a $30,000 seed grant and 1 hour a week of mentorship from me, just to make sure that I didn't make the same obvious mistakes that I had just made 6 months earlier. So that worked really well. That was kind of the impetus for charity entrepreneurship, the org. Are there these fairly trivial barriers that maybe for a bigger org are pretty easy to knock down, pretty easy to get out of people's ways, but are stopping people from pursuing this otherwise very exciting, impactful career path? Stuff like finding a co-founder, stuff like getting the first grant, stuff like getting registered. For an organization that's doing this for 30 different people, not a big deal. For an individual starting from scratch, huge deal. So that was kind of the impetus. Charity entrepreneurship ran pretty solidly for a few years. It's been running, I guess, 5.5 years now. About 4 years in, we start getting some grant makers knocking on our door saying, hey, this program looks kind of cool. Can I go through it? I'm like, well, they're applying money. You don't really want to start a direct charity. It doesn't really make that much sense. But some of them were pretty insistent. Some of them were a pretty good fit to the point where I probably would have let them in if they didn't have money. And that felt a bit silly. So we let in one and said, okay, you're going to go through it. We're not going to change the content at all. We'll see how possible it is. Turns out they changed their giving quite substantially. They hired one of the people in the program to be their kind of main executive director of the foundation, and they pivoted in very effective directions. So that started throwing me a little bit of the Fortify Health experience. Pretty small amount of effort, helping someone shift their career path pretty significantly. So we ended up starting a grant making program, which I'll talk a little bit more later. And that kind of started to open the door to the idea of maybe we should take a slightly broader approach and think about what career paths are very exciting and could use a little bit more on ramp. Could use the equivalent of an MBA or something like this to kind of get people into that. So, rest of the presentation, talking about CE changing to a slightly broader, slightly bigger brand called AIM. High impact career paths and which ones we're kind of excited about and can help facilitate. Not to say those are the only high impact career paths, but there's some that we can kind of give extra help with. And then kind of the broader picture of how these high impact career paths, I guess, tie in together and create ultimately, I think, a lot more impact than they would in isolation. So the big kind of announcement that's news is charity entrepreneurship is changing our branding to ambitious impact, or at least somewhat changing our branding. Ambitious impact is going to be kind of our broader flagship brand, the kind of university, if you will, with charity entrepreneurship being our core subject or our core program, but with other programs being launched. All with the same idea of helping people get into, some good ways to see slides. All with the idea of kind of helping people to get into these high impact career paths. So we'll talk about each of these. That's the kind of broad strokes. Good analogy is thinking about ambitious impact as the uni with the different subjects kind of leading to different career paths, although all of our subjects are a lot more applied, a lot more specific, and pretty much entirely impact focused. We're not that excited to teach something that doesn't fairly directly lead to a role that's identified as a top career path. So our values since the beginning have been pretty similar. We want to kind of create a lot of impact. We want to do it in kind of a consequential way. We have kind of a scientific mindset. We have a pretty ambitious from lean startup thing. But we've added a couple more values as we've kind of broadened our intent to teach more things. One of them is this idea of modestly maximizing total impact. I think this is a little bit different, especially for those who are a little bit more familiar with the EA movement. We have kind of taken a more aggressive stance towards epistemic modesty in terms of thinking, there is no doubt some charities that are better than others. There's no doubt some career paths that are better than others. But at the very peak, it's really, really hard to tell. Our very best animal charity versus our very best global health charity, man, there's a lot of ethical, epistemic assumptions built into that to actually make that comparison. So we kind of are excited about these field-leading things, and similarly with these career paths, we think that the difference between the best fit across these career paths is maybe less important than people finding an avenue that they're going to really dominate it and really become very talented. And the other thing is we've thought more and more about ecosystems. So part of why we set up these programs is thinking about what does our community need? What are the resources that are missing? Is something talent limited? Is it funding limited? Is it ideal limited? What's the kind of shortage? And then how do we kind of pump more talent and energy as a community into that to make sure that the net impact is the highest? So we'll talk a touch about that implications after we talk a little bit about the training programs. So first training program, the one that I've already talked about a little bit, so I'll go on. The briefest thing is our incubation program for charities. It's kind of been running for a long time, fairly successful, and what makes someone a really good fit for this program is a little bit of kind of an entrepreneurial mindset and a ability to see problems and kind of work around them. So there's something in the kind of resourcefulness category or something in the coming up with solutions when you hit a wall that makes you a really good fit for entrepreneurship. I actually think for people in the medical background, it's also a really, really good utilization of your backgrounds because there are a lot of benefits, especially if you're working on a global health or biorisk related area, kind of being seen as an expert, even if it's not something you actually have expertise in. People just kind of index on, okay, healthcare experience, healthcare credentials. This person probably knows what they're talking about, even though in practice, if you become an expert in lead, you're going to have to relearn all those things. You're not going to have to actually pick that up in your education. So details of this, it's 2 months full time. We support you for 12 months afterwards, including a seed grant that tends to be in about the $150,000 range. And we try to cover all the costs. In fact, you'll notice this across all of our programs, they're all free. They're just aimed at kind of helping people get into those career paths. So there's no cost, and we do cover the stipend cost of kind of cost of living as people go through these programs. This is a program with the strongest track record by a mile because it's the one we've been running the longest. 31 charities, multiple that are double funded, multiple that are ACE recommended, lots that are open fill supported, basically any kind of charity accolade that you could have for super young charities. A lot of these charities are still in their infancy. Our oldest is 5 years. Most of them are under 2 years. So there's still a bit of questions of how will those charities evolve? Will a charity that looks really good at year 4 actually look really good at year 10? Still questions about that. And I have a kind of simple test question, which is, can you get yourself through an online course that you're really excited to do? If you can self-motivate and you kind of find that exciting and you like going at your own pace and like kind of coming up with your own solutions to the problems, that can indicate a really good fit for some sort of career path like that, because ultimately you don't have a boss, you don't have a manager. You have to kind of have the inner ambition, autonomy to get the job done. Okay, boring though, lots of people know that. I will highlight that we have a ton of alumni from this program with medical backgrounds. So these are a few of them. There actually are more than are on this slide, but it's been very beneficial. In fact, we sometimes joke that our classic combination is like one doctor and one consultant, and then you kind of pair those together and like mix it, and it ends up starting a good charity. So it's not always that way, but there is some vague thing of someone who brings in some of that businessy skills, someone who brings in some of that researchy skills, quantitative skills, and then that kind of pairing really well. So next, grant making, also mentioned briefly. This is mostly aimed at people who are already deploying a bunch of capital, are already in a grant making role, but it's the same sort of concept. Can we teach the skill sets? Can we teach the kind of methodologies or tools that would be useful for someone being able to deploy capital? This program, in fact, all of our programs are fairly cause agnostic. We're not really pitching a specific answer in terms of grant making. We're more trying to pitch, if you get 1,000 applications, how do you reasonably narrow that down to 10? Using a systematic process such that the 10 actually look the best, and it's not just who you happen to be at a conference, that sort of thing. It's a really good fit for philanthropic organizations that are at a pivot point. So if you know anyone who's in that space and they're thinking about a revamp, or they're just starting out, or that sort of thing, that's a really good fit for this sort of program. It's 2 months, it's a lot lighter, it's only 1 day a week, so it can be done simultaneously. And we've now had 18 foundations that go through, all the way from brand new, never heard of them, don't have a website yet, to pretty well established actors that lots of people have heard of but we can't name. Yeah, kind of the full gamut. They're collectively donating $100 million a year, which is really exciting. And the best test for this is, do you want to put 50% of your time into grant making, have some capital deployed, and kind of benefit from an MBA style program? Again, this was kind of a gap that we noticed. I mean, the charity entrepreneurship gap we really noticed because we went through the career path ourselves and kind of think, what did we want to do? But we noticed this gap because people were coming to us, looking at the content in that book and going like, hey, this looks super useful for grant making. No one else is teaching things quite like this. So kind of came out of an assessed need. Next one, probably the most exciting one that I'm talking about today, is our research program. So this one's brand new. We've only run it once before. And it's basically an online program equipped for people who want to get into research, and we take the definition of research here pretty broadly. So this could be measurement and evaluation roles for direct implementation charities. It could be cross-cause prioritization research. It could be working for a charity evaluator. It could even be doing kind of like think tank style research that affects government policy, all that sort of stuff bucketing. And what this is a really good fit for is people who either want to sample the career of research. You think like, okay, I've done a few projects on my own, but do I actually want to do this as a 40-hour role? Or someone who maybe knows they're there, but wants to take the next step up, moving from a more junior role, or maybe a role that's kind of adjacent to impact, into a more direct impactful role. So, a bunch of exciting things about this program. It's 12 weeks, it's all online, so it's a little bit easier in terms of accommodating into people's locations. Again, we cover the costs, and the very exciting thing with the program is applications are open right now. So you can apply to it for the next 2 days. I know this is a very tight deadline, but secretly, we tend to leave the applications up about 48 hours after we officially close them. So you'll probably be able to track down the website if you do end up wanting to look at that later. So more limited track record for this one. It's only run once before. The satisfaction was pretty good. The job offers that people got afterwards were pretty good, but we don't have enough statistics to be really confident in what that ends up leading to. The hope with this is for people to get into a research-oriented role or research-oriented career path that feels a lot more impactful than what they were doing before. So it's really good for that sort of career pivot. Best simple task with this one: do you have some research skills and want to test if you want to do it full time, or do you want to move from that junior role to a more senior role, or a slightly less impact-oriented role to a more impact-oriented one? So getting a role with a charity that is Gabriel top recommended, or this sort of equivalent. Last program I'll talk about, the EGI program, which is a very brand new program as well. We're only running it this once, so it's a one-off, but it's basically starting out more effective giving organizations. So I think I've talked with a couple of you already about doing what we can. That's an example of an effective giving organization. It's kind of talking about charitable impact and to kind of how to donate effectively to a much broader audience. So we think there's a real opportunity to do this. It's done in a few countries. You have something like Effective Spending, which is doing a great job at this in Germany. We don't have the equivalent of that for that many countries. So there's not a lot of kind of effective giving advocacy going on in most of the world. We think we can solve that. We have a pool of pretty exciting people. This can be a good fit if you're kind of a networker, naturally, if you love talking about this sort of stuff, if you end up talking to people all the time, and they end up kind of getting excited about GiveWell, or excited about top charities, or excited about taking some sort of pledge. That's a great sign that this is a role for you. 8 weeks, costs will be covered. We haven't run this program ever before, so we can't really speak to its track record yet. I would guess that about 5 effective giving works come out of this that are kind of regionally specific. So it might be an effective giving org that's targeting Italy or something like that. Maybe with one founder that's based there and one founder that's been international, kind of pairing it off. Simple test: do you love talking to people about effective charities? And does it work? Do you tend to convince your friends and family and that sort of thing to look into this a little bit more? So, okay, and we have a bunch of scattered random programs that can help people get to the next step of various career paths, and that's cool and exciting. But stepping back a little bit, we have been thinking a lot more about how do we build into a broader philanthropic ecosystem, and somewhat thinking about what our place in the effective altruism world, but also somewhat thinking about our place in the broader philanthropic world, the broader kind of charitable community, what's missing and what's not. So the ingredients are fairly simple for thinking about how to make an impact, right? There's some sort of idea component. You need to have an action that you want to get done. There has to be some sort of financial support for that venture, and then there has to be some sort of talent or people who can execute on that idea actually getting done. You combine those together in about the right ratio, you get impact. If any of those are lacking, then it tends to be bottlenecked. So when we think about kind of the context of our programs, we kind of break them down in this sort of way. So there's some programs that kind of aimed at addressing the funding bottleneck, stuff like the EGI program I just talked about, or the AIM grant making. The main vehicle for how those have impact is funding. And we do a few little things on the side. We set up some funding circles to coordinate donors and that sort of thing, and that's all kind of in that funding stream. And we always want to make sure that stream is impactful enough to make all the other streams float. Same thing for talent. Ultimately, the CE program, although very exciting, is extremely competitive. You know, we get thousands of applications. It's a good fit for about 30 people. That's pretty brutal. A lot of people are looking for high impact ways to make a difference. So coming up with kind of other career paths, didn't talk about these two, but we are thinking about a policy program. Potentially we are thinking about a startup program in the kind of for-profit sector program as well. Ways to absorb talent. There's a lot of other ways to absorb talent. Of course, every organization that gets founded has a whole bunch of jobs that get created from that and kind of impactful roles. There's paid internships and work placements and all these sort of things that I think we're also trying to kind of help structure such that if someone wants to get into a high impact career, there's an easier route than applying for 1,000 jobs, getting rejected from 999 of them. That's the slow way. And then finally, ideas. I think there are a lot of really great ideas out there that people already know about and that can be traction, but there's also a lot of room for research. We have a research team that has generated ideas, and then our research program now is also generating ideas. But overall, there's a lot more to be discovered, and you can only start the most impactful thing you've actually uncovered. So these kind of all build together, and our hope is that they end up feeding to make a kind of sum greater than the parts in terms of if there is a bottleneck in the broader ecosystem, if we're noticing a shortage in any of those, we as an organization can kind of direct more talent, more students through these different programs to kind of alleviate that, meaning that everyone ends up in a pretty impactful role. You can kind of see where the gaps are, where the kind of shortages are across the sector or the cause area that you're most excited about. So, final question, is this an ecosystem that you might want to be a part of? Is this an ecosystem that sounds exciting? Do you want to think about different career paths? And that's probably a fit for some people and probably not a fit for other people, but I think thinking through the framework of how do I have the most impact on my career, and then what are the steps that I can take to kind of get there is really valuable, and we want to help out, if at all possible, to help people on that journey, at least the first couple steps of that journey, to move to a more impactful path. Great.